I spent 3 decades of my life trying to control things. My career, my relationships, my reputation, even my thoughts. I built elaborate systems, schedules, contingency plans. I believed that with enough foresight, enough discipline, enough willpower, I could bend reality to my vision. And then, one morning in Bali, I watched a 70-year-old man surf. He wasn't athletic. His body was weathered, his movements unhurried. But when a wave came, something extraordinary happened. He didn't fight it. He didn't conquer it. He simply became it. His body moved with a kind of intelligence that transcended thought, responding to forces I couldn't even see. That's when I understood. I had been living my entire life backwards. The ancient Taoists had a term for what that surfer embodied, wu-wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, but these translations miss something essential. Wu-wei isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing without forcing. It's about power without violence. It's about achieving without grasping. We live in a civilization built on the opposite principle. We are taught from childhood that life is something to be seized, controlled, dominated. Take charge, they tell us. Make it happen. Don't wait for opportunities. Create them. And so we spend our lives pushing, straining, exhausting ourselves against the current, never stopping to ask, what if the current knows something we don't? Let me tell you what a surfer actually does, because most of us who've never surfed misunderstand it completely. A surfer doesn't catch a wave through force. You cannot chase down a wave. You cannot wrestle it into submission. The ocean is infinitely more powerful than you, and it doesn't care about your intentions. If you try to impose your will on it, it'll simply crush you, or worse, ignore you entirely. So what does the surfer do? First, they study. They watch the patterns, the rhythms, the intervals between sets. They learn to read what's coming before it arrives. This isn't control, it's attention. It's a kind of listening that happens with the whole body. Second, they position themselves. Not where they want the wave to be, but where the wave will actually be. They surrender their preferences to reality. They align themselves with what is, not what they wish were true. Third, and this is crucial, they paddle. Wu-wei is not passivity. The surfer paddles hard, builds momentum, commits fully. But here's the paradox. They paddle not to force the wave, but to match its speed. They work intensely to achieve effortlessness. And then at the precise moment, a moment that cannot be calculated, only felt, they stop paddling. They stand up, they let go, they trust. What happens next is not the surfer riding the wave. It's the surfer becoming the wave. The boundary between self and ocean dissolves. There is no longer a person controlling a natural force. There is only the movement itself, expressing through a human form. This is wu-wei. This is the power that doesn't push. The Taoist sage Lao Tzu wrote, "The supreme good is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. It is content with the low places that people disdain. Thus it is like the Tao. Water doesn't fight, it doesn't force, and yet, over time, it carves canyons through mountains." But we don't trust this. We can't. Our entire civilization is built on the opposite assumption, that control is not only possible, but necessary. That without constant vigilance and force, everything will fall apart. And I understand why. Because sometimes, when we let go, things do fall apart. Relationships end, projects fail, plans crumble. And in those moments, we tell ourselves, see, I should have held on tighter. I should have tried harder. I should have maintained control. But here's what we miss. The things that fall apart when we let go were never truly held together in the first place. We were simply exhausting ourselves, maintaining an illusion. Think about your own life. How much energy do you spend trying to control things that are fundamentally uncontrollable? Other people's opinions of you, the future, the past, your own thoughts and feelings, the economy, your aging body, the weather, the traffic, the outcome of your efforts. We grip these things with white knuckles as if our tension could somehow alter reality. And what does this gripping cost us? Our peace, our presence, our ability to respond to what's actually happening, because we're too busy fighting what we wish weren't happening. The psychologist Carl Rogers once said something profound. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This is wu-wei applied to the self. When we stop fighting against our own nature, we discover a natural intelligence that knows how to evolve. But our culture teaches us the opposite. It teaches us that we are fundamentally flawed, that our natural impulses cannot be trusted, that we must constantly monitor and correct ourselves. And so we become divided against ourselves, at war with our own being. I spent years in this war. I would set rigid rules for myself. Wake at 5, meditate for an hour, write 2,000 words, exercise, eat only these foods, think only these thoughts. And when I inevitably failed to maintain this impossible standard, I would punish myself with guilt and shame, then double down with even stricter rules. I was trying to surf by nailing my feet to the board. There's an old saying, sometimes attributed to various wisdom traditions, you cannot push the river. But I want to offer a deeper version. The greatest strength is not the ability to push the river, it's the ability not to drown in it. Because here's the truth, the river is flowing whether you push it or not. Life is happening whether you control it or not. The question isn't whether the current exists. It's whether you'll exhaust yourself fighting it or learn to move with it. This doesn't mean we become passive. This doesn't mean we abandon our agency or our responsibility. The surfer is not passive. The surfer is intensely active, but their action is aligned with the larger forces at play. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're in a difficult conversation with someone you love. They're upset, maybe angry. Your instinct might be to control the situation, to explain, to defend, to fix their feelings, to make them see reason. This is pushing the river. What would wu-wei look like instead? It would mean first, truly listening. Not listening to respond, but listening to understand. Feeling the emotional current beneath their words. Second, it would mean acknowledging what is, rather than arguing with reality. They are upset. That's the river. Third, it would mean responding from a place of genuine presence, rather than from your script of how this conversation should go. This takes far more strength than control. Control is actually the easier path, because it lets us stay in our heads, in our plans, in our illusions. Wu-wei demands that we be fully present to reality as it is, which is terrifying because reality doesn't conform to our preferences. The Taoist texts speak of the uncarved block, the pu. It represents our original nature before society carved it into a specific shape. Before we learned to force and control, we had an innate wisdom, a natural responsiveness to life. Children have this. Animals have this. Water has this. Watch a tree in a storm. It doesn't try to stand rigid against the wind. It bends, it sways, it moves with the force that could break it. And this flexibility is what allows it to survive. The tree that tries to resist the wind is the tree that snaps. We are not so different. When we try to stand rigid against the storms of life, against change, against loss, against uncertainty, we become brittle. We break. But when we learn to bend, to move with what comes, we discover a resilience we never knew we had. So how do we actually practice this? How do we move from the exhausting grip of control to the power of wu-wei? It starts with noticing. Just noticing where you're forcing, where you're pushing against reality, where you're trying to make something happen that isn't ready to happen. This noticing, without judgment, is itself a form of wu-wei. You're not trying to fix your controlling nature. That would just be more control. You're simply becoming aware of it. Then experiment with letting go. Not all at once. That's just another form of forcing. But in small moments. Maybe you're stuck in traffic. Notice the tension in your body, the frustration in your mind. You're trying to push the traffic forward with your anger. What happens if you let go? Not giving up, not becoming passive, but simply accepting this is the speed we're moving now. Or maybe you're working on a creative project and it's not flowing. You're forcing words, forcing ideas, pushing against your own resistance. What happens if you step away? If you trust that the ideas will come when they're ready? This isn't laziness, it's alignment with your own natural rhythms. I learned this the hard way with my writing. For years, I would sit at my desk and force words onto the page, even when nothing wanted to come. I believed that discipline meant showing up regardless of inspiration. And yes, showing up matters. But there's a difference between showing up and forcing. Now, I show up, I sit down, I open myself to the work. But if the words don't want to come, I don't fight them. I might read instead, or walk, or simply sit in silence. And inevitably, when I stop forcing, something opens. The words come, but they come from a different place. Not from my will, but from something deeper. This is what the old surfer in Bali understood. He didn't make the wave happen. He didn't even make himself surf. He simply positioned himself in alignment with the ocean's power and then allowed that power to express through him. You cannot catch the wave. You can only let go and become it. This is true for everything in life, your career, your relationships, your creative work, your spiritual path. You cannot force these things into being through sheer will, but you can position yourself. You can pay attention, you can prepare, and then, when the moment comes, you can let go into it. The Tao Te Ching says, in the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. This is the path of wu-wei, not accumulating more control, more techniques, more strategies, but dropping, letting go, becoming simpler, more natural, more aligned with what already is. Here's the final paradox, and it's one that our culture finds almost impossible to accept. The greatest power comes from surrendering the need for power. When you stop trying to control everything, you discover that you're connected to something much larger than your individual will. Call it the Tao, call it life, call it the universe, call it God, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that there's an intelligence at work that vastly exceeds your conscious mind. The surfer doesn't create the wave's power, but by aligning with it, by becoming it, they access a force they could never generate alone. This is available to all of us, in every moment, not just in dramatic situations, but in the smallest details of daily life. When you speak from presence, rather than from script, your words carry a different weight. When you act from alignment, rather than from force, your actions have a different effect. When you love from openness, rather than from need, your love transforms both you and the beloved. This is wu-wei. This is the power that doesn't push. This is the strength that doesn't strain. This is the action that doesn't force. And yes, it's terrifying, because it means giving up the illusion that you're in control. It means trusting something you cannot see or measure. It means accepting that you are not the author of your life, but rather a character in a much larger story. A story that's being written through you, not by you. But here's what I've discovered in my 58 years. The things I've forced have always been fragile. They've required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant energy. And eventually, they've all fallen apart. But the things that have flowed, the things that have emerged naturally when I've aligned myself with the deeper currents of life, these have had a power and a permanence that no amount of forcing could create. So I invite you to consider, where in your life are you trying to catch the wave? Where are you gripping, forcing, pushing against what is? And what might happen if you let go? Not giving up, not becoming passive, but simply trusting that the ocean knows how to carry you. You cannot catch the wave. You can only let go and become it. And in that becoming, you discover something extraordinary. You were never separate from the ocean in the first place. You were always the wave. You were always the water. You were always the movement itself. You just forgot. Welcome home.